In the quiet hush of a city park, under the soft glow of distant lights, a 66-year-old retired Army nurse, Angela Hayes, embarked on her routine evening stroll with her faithful companion, Shadow. But the peaceful scene shattered as three figures materialized from the deepening shadows, their gazes sharp with malice, their low whispers hinting at dark intentions. They perceived her as an effortless mark, a vulnerable, elderly woman with no escape. What remained unknown to them was her history of confronting peril, and with her steadfast dog at her side, she was more than prepared to face it once more. The tranquil, deserted evening in Rosewood enveloped Angela Hayes as she adjusted her scarf, the crisp night air embracing her. The streets were hushed, too hushed for her comfort. She recalled a time when the neighborhood felt secure, children's laughter echoing, families enjoying leisurely walks. Yet a shift had occurred. A wave of burglaries and assaults had prompted residents to lock their doors earlier, leaving the streets deserted long before dusk. Still, Angela refused to let apprehension govern her existence. Beside her, Shadow strode with his customary assuredness, his substantial form moving purposefully, his keen eyes surveying their surroundings. Angela glanced down at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "Looks like it's just us again, huh, boy?" she murmured, her voice soft yet resolute. Shadow's ears perked at her words, and he emitted a low, comforting rumble. Angela had welcomed Shadow into her home 2 years prior, following his retirement from police service. She understood he was more than a mere pet, he was a guardian. Shadow had undergone training to apprehend offenders, detect hazards and never yield. Angela had witnessed glimpses of that training in his responsive reactions to sounds, his vigilance and his unwavering devotion. She placed complete trust in him. As they meandered through the park, Angela inhaled deeply, allowing the familiar aroma of damp earth and grass to soothe her nerves. She cherished these walks, an opportunity to clear her thoughts and embrace solitude. Tonight, however, felt different. Overhead, streetlights flickered, casting elongated, distorted shadows. The wind whispered through the trees, but another presence stirred her, prompting her to tighten her grip on Shadow's leash. Ahead, 3 men converged beneath a flickering street lamp, their heads bowed, conversing in hushed tones. Angela slowed her pace, her instincts acutely alerted. Shadow halted, his body rigid, his eyes fixed on the trio. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "It's okay, boy," Angela whispered, though uncertainty gnawed at her. She squared her shoulders and pressed onward, refusing to betray any sign of fear. One of the men spotted her first, nudging his companion and gesturing in her direction. "Look at this," he sneered, his voice cutting through the quiet night. "Grandma out here walking her guard dog." Angela maintained her forward gaze, feigning deafness, but her heart hammered. The tallest of the 3, a man with a shorn head and a scar bisecting his cheek, stepped forward. "Hey lady," he called, "nice dog but he's expensive." Shadow's growl intensified as he subtly positioned himself in front of Angela. "Easy, Shadow," she murmured, her voice unwavering. She met the man's gaze, unwilling to be cowed. "Can I assist you with something?" The man grinned, revealing stained teeth. "Yeah, actually you can," he said, taking another step closer. "Why don't you hand over your purse and your phone? Oh, and don't forget the dog. He looks like he'd fetch a tidy sum." Angela's stomach knotted, but her voice remained composed. "I believe you're mistaken," she stated. "I'm simply out for a walk. Why don't you step aside and permit me to pass?" The man guffawed, joined by his friends. "You hear that, guys? She thinks she has a choice." The second man, shorter and more heavily built, retrieved a knife from his jacket, its blade gleaming in the dim light. "We're not requesting, lady." Shadow barked, sharp and authoritative, the sound slicing through their laughter like a blade. The man with the knife recoiled, but the leader advanced. "You'd best call off your mutt before things get nasty," he warned, his grin vanishing. Angela tightened her hold on Shadow's leash, her mind racing, evaluating her options. Fleeing was impossible. Even if she attempted, they wouldn't allow her to escape far. Shadow was trained, but 3 against 1, even for him, was a perilous confrontation. "I'm warning you," she stated, her voice like steel. "You don't want to do this." The leader's grin returned, this time colder. "I think we do." Then in an instant, everything unfolded. The man with the knife lunged, but Shadow was swifter. With a snarl he sprang, his jaws clamping onto the man's arm. The knife clattered to the ground as the man shrieked, attempting to dislodge Shadow. Angela recoiled, her heart pounding as adrenaline coursed through her veins. The leader roared, charging towards Shadow, but Angela reacted instinctively. She snatched a can of pepper spray from her bag and aimed directly at his face. The man staggered back, cursing and clawing at his eyes. "You crazy old hag," he shrieked, but Angela stood her ground. The third man wavered, his eyes darting between his incapacitated friends and Shadow, who still held the first man subdued. Angela directed the pepper spray at him. "Don't even consider it," she warned. For a moment he froze, then spun and vanished into the night. The leader, still rubbing his eyes, tried to flee, but Shadow released the first man and lunged, tackling him to the ground. Angela's hands trembled as she retrieved her phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I require police assistance at Rosewood Park," she said, her voice steady despite the surrounding pandemonium. "I was assaulted, but my dog intervened. They're subdued, but I need officers here immediately." By the time the dispatcher confirmed help was en route, Shadow had both men pinned, growling low and menacingly whenever they attempted to stir. Angela knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his back. "Good boy," she whispered. "Good boy." The wail of sirens pierced the night, breaking the tension. Angela exhaled slowly, relief washing over her, but her eyes remained fixed on the two men prone on the pavement. "You tangled with the wrong woman," she murmured under her breath. Shadow's tail gave a slight wag, his eyes still locked on the men as if to add, "and the wrong dog." Angela Hayes remained resolute as flashing red and blue lights illuminated the darkened park. Shadow stayed taut, his powerful frame still coiled, poised to spring if required. The two men sprawled on the ground, Trey Harris and Damon Reed, moaned, shielding their eyes from the harsh glare of the approaching patrol cars. The sound of slamming car doors echoed as Officer Darrell Lewis emerged, his keen eyes instantly assessing the scene. Angela exhaled, relief flooding her. Darrell wasn't merely a police officer. He was a long-standing friend, someone Angela had come to trust over the years. He moved with purpose, his hand resting lightly on the grip of his holstered weapon as he approached. "Angela," he called, his voice steady but laced with concern. "Over here, Darrell." She replied, her voice calm yet firm. Shadow stood guard beside her, his gaze fixed on the men on the ground. Darrell surveyed the situation. The nearby knife, the trembling thug pinned beneath Shadow's vigilant gaze, and the glint of pepper spray residue on Trey's reddened face. He instantly pieced it together. "You okay?" he inquired, stepping closer. "I'm fine," Angela stated, "but these two believed they could make me an easy target." She gestured at Trey and Damon. Turns out they had no idea who they were dealing with. Darrell's lips twitched as if suppressing a smile, but his focus swiftly shifted to the suspects. "What the hell were you thinking?" he barked at Trey, who squirmed but remained silent. Damon clutched his arm, wincing from the distinct indentations left by Shadow's teeth. Two more officers, one younger and another slightly older, exited their vehicle and promptly secured the area. The older officer nodded at Shadow. "That's quite a dog you have there, ma'am." "Former K9, Angela said, scratching behind Shadow's ears as he relaxed just slightly. "Still knows how to handle himself." "You can say that again," the younger officer mumbled as he carefully retrieved the knife and placed it in an evidence bag. Darrell knelt beside Trey, pulling his wrists behind his back and snapping on handcuffs. "You're under arrest for assault and attempted robbery," he stated, his tone brooking no argument. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "Assault," Trey retorted, coughing from the lingering pepper spray. "She's the one who attacked us. That dog's out of control." "Out of control?" Angela repeated, stepping closer. "You brandished a knife at me, Trey. What precisely did you anticipate would transpire?" "A handshake." Darrell gave Trey a look that silenced him before he could retort. "I'd watch what you say, Harris. We'll let the cameras and witnesses tell the story." Damon, meanwhile, had ceased struggling entirely, his head bowed, his breathing shallow as the younger officer cuffed him as well. "It wasn't supposed to go like this," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. Darrell stood, his eyes sharp as he turned to Angela. "You mentioned 3 men?" Angela nodded. "The third one ran. Skinny guy, probably mid-20s. He fled down 5th Street. The older officer spoke into his radio, relaying the description. We'll sweep the area, he said. He won't get far. Angela finally relaxed, releasing the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Shadow leaned into her leg, his tail wagging slightly now that the immediate danger had passed. Daryl approached, lowering his voice. Are you sure you're okay? That could have escalated quickly. Angela gave him a pointed look. You know me, Daryl. I'm not one to yield without a fight. Daryl chuckled, shaking his head. You never are. But still, you need to exercise caution out here. These individuals are becoming bolder. Angela's face hardened. Then perhaps it's time someone reminded them whose neighborhood this is. Daryl nodded. We'll get these two processed and keep you updated. But Angela, he glanced at Shadow, you should probably reconsider walking alone at night even with him. Angela smirked. Daryl, you of all people should know Shadow and I don't easily frighten. As the officers hoisted Trey and Damon to their feet, Angela couldn't help but notice how diminished they appeared now. Their earlier bravado had utterly crumbled, leaving behind only fear and mortification. The younger officer shot her a glance. Ma'am, you'll need to come down to the station to provide a full statement. I'll be there, Angela stated firmly. Daryl gestured toward his car. I can offer you a ride. Angela shook her head. No need. I'll make my own way there. I'm not letting these fools alter my routine. Daryl didn't argue, he understood better. I'll see you there then. Angela watched as the officers loaded the suspects into the back of their patrol cars. She knelt beside Shadow, running her hand through his thick fur. Good boy, she whispered. You protected us tonight. Shadow wagged his tail and leaned into her touch. Angela rose and looked back toward the park entrance. She wasn't naive. This incident was merely one manifestation of a larger issue. Rosewood was changing and not for the better. But as long as she had Shadow by her side, she wouldn't retreat. Composing herself, she turned and began walking toward home. Shadow followed, his steps steady and assured, his head held high. The skirmish might have concluded for now, but Angela knew this was merely the beginning. Angela Hayes entered the brightly lit police station, the hum of activity enveloping her. Officers moved purposefully, phones rang, and the murmur of hushed conversations filled the air. Despite the bustle, Angela walked with determination, her back straight, her expression calm but resolute. Shadow padded beside her, his nails clicking softly against the tiled floor. Officer Daryl Lewis met her at the bullpen entrance. He gave a quick nod, then leaned down to give Shadow a gentle pat on the head. Good boy, he murmured before straightening. The interview room's ready. I'll sit in with you while you give your statement. Angela tilted her head, giving him a look that conveyed her disinterest in being coddled. Daryl, I've testified in courtrooms with far more intimidating faces than these rookies milling about here. She glanced at a young officer fumbling with a coffee cup. I'll be fine. Daryl chuckled but didn't step aside. Still, humor me. She didn't object. Instead, she gestured for Shadow to sit by the door and followed Daryl into the small interview room. The space carried a faint scent of disinfectant and stale coffee. Angela sat down, folding her hands on the table, her sharp eyes following Daryl as he prepared a recorder and notepad. Ready when you are, he said. Angela took a deep breath and began. She recounted the events with precise detail, from the moment she first noticed the three men to their taunts, threats, and the glint of the knife. She described Shadow's swift and deliberate reactions, and how she had used her pepper spray to incapacitate one of the assailants. Daryl listened without interruption, though his jaw tightened as she described Trey pulling out the blade. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled. Hell, Angela, that could have gone terribly wrong. Angela's lips pressed into a thin line. It didn't because of Shadow, Daryl interjected, and because you didn't freeze up. Most people wouldn't have walked away from something like that. Angela met his gaze evenly. That's because most people don't have a dog like Shadow or my years of training. But what about everyone else? What happens when someone without a shadow crosses paths with punks like Trey? Daryl didn't reply immediately. Instead, he tapped his pen against his notepad, his expression darkening. That's what we need to rectify before Angela could respond, a knock came at the door. The younger officer from earlier, Officer Carson, poked his head inside. Sorry to interrupt, but we apprehended the third individual, Eli Turner. Daryl stood quickly. Where? Picked him up near the bus stop on 5th, Carson replied. Looks terrified. Claims he didn't want to harm anyone, just got entangled with the wrong crowd. Angela snorted. He didn't seem so terrified when he was circling behind me. Daryl glanced at her. Mind if I speak with him first? He might open up. Angela nodded. Go, but don't let him spin too many excuses. Daryl left and Angela leaned back, glancing at the mirrored window on the wall. She knew someone was likely observing, but she didn't care. Her mind was already racing, contemplating what needed to happen next. 15 minutes later, Daryl returned, his expression a blend of frustration and intrigue. Well? Angela inquired. He's talking, Daryl said. Claims Trey pressured him into it. Said Damon was the one who brought the knife, and that he didn't think it would escalate that far. Angela raised an eyebrow. And you believe him? Daryl hesitated. Not entirely. But I think he's scared enough to cooperate. If he testifies against Trey and Damon, it could help secure convictions for both. Angela considered this. So what now? Daryl sat back down. Now we file the charges and present this to the DA. With the security footage, your statement plus Eli flipping, we've got a robust case. Angela's shoulders relaxed slightly, but the fire in her eyes didn't dim. Good. But this doesn't end here, Daryl. You and I both know these streets aren't as safe as they once were. Daryl sighed. You're right, it's deteriorating, especially around Rosewood. That's why we need more than just arrests, Angela said, leaning forward. We need prevention. Patrols that genuinely make a difference. Programs for kids before they fall in with individuals like Trey. Daryl rubbed the back of his neck. You sound like you're running for office. Angela smirked. No, I'm simply someone who's weary of watching this neighborhood crumble. And if you're astute, you'll support me on this. Daryl nodded. I'm already there. Angela stood, gathering her belongings. Good. Now let's ensure these charges stick. She opened the door and whistled for Shadow, who immediately trotted over. Daryl followed her out, and the two walked through the station, past rows of desks and officers who couldn't help but glance their way. As Angela reached the exit, Daryl called after her. Angela. She turned, one hand on the door. Be careful, he said, his tone softer this time. You're tough, but even you're not invincible. Angela smiled, her eyes flickering down at Shadow before returning to Daryl. With him by my side, I just might be. And with that she stepped out into the night, Shadow following closely, his ears perked and his eyes sharp. She knew this wasn't the end, far from it. But she also knew one thing for certain. She and Shadow weren't finished fighting for their neighborhood, not by a long shot. Many days later, Angela Hayes sat poised at the long oak table in the city's community hall, her fingers resting gently on Shadow's head as he sat obediently beside her. The room hummed with hushed conversations. Neighbors, reporters, and local officials had gathered to witness what many anticipated would mark a turning point for Rosewood. Officer Daryl Lewis stood at the front, flanked by the police chief and a representative from the district attorney's office. The tension in the room was palpable. The recent assault on Angela had profoundly shaken the community, yet it had also ignited a sense of urgency, a demand for accountability. Tonight, the people sought more than mere apologies. They craved decisive action. Daryl cleared his throat and stepped forward. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for assembling on such short notice. As many of you are aware, an incident occurred 3 nights ago involving a violent attempted robbery against one of our own, Ms. Angela Hayes. Eyes turned toward her. Angela straightened in her chair, maintaining a composed expression, even as her pulse quickened. She hadn't come here to be pitied. She had come to ensure this moment counted. Daryl continued. Thanks to Ms. Hayes' swift thinking and the courageous actions of her dog, Shadow, the suspects, Trevor Harris and Damon Reed, were apprehended and now face multiple charges, including assault with a deadly weapon, attempted robbery, and resisting arrest. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of satisfaction and simmering indignation. Angela met the gaze of her daughter, Nia, seated a few rows back, her eyes sharp with determination. Angela knew Nia was already contemplating the legal battle ahead. Daryl pressed on. The third suspect, Eli Turner, has agreed to collaborate with law enforcement. His testimony has already proven pivotal in building the case against Harris and Reed. Angela's eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't fully trust Eli, not yet, but if his cooperation helped incarcerate Trey and Damon, she would accept it. While we commend Ms. Hayes and Shadow for their bravery, Darryl stated, this incident also underscores the imperative for stronger measures to safeguard our community. And that's what tonight is about, accountability and reform. Angela leaned back slightly, her fingers brushing against Shadow's fur. This was the segment she had been anticipating. The police chief stepped forward. We recognize that what transpired was not an isolated event. Crime in this area has been steadily escalating, and it's evident we must do more. Effective immediately, we are implementing an expanded neighborhood patrol program, increasing officer presence during peak hours. Additionally, we will be re-evaluating our response protocols to better address violent incidents. Angela's eyebrows lifted slightly. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. She raised her hand. The chief hesitated, then nodded. Ms. Hayes. Angela rose slowly. I appreciate the changes you're proposing, Chief, but I believe we all understand more is required. Her voice resonated through the room, steady and commanding. What happened to me could have befallen anyone, and let's be frank, not everyone has a dog like Shadow guarding their back. Several individuals chuckled nervously, but Angela did not smile. This isn't solely about patrols, she continued. It's about prevention. It's about offering our children a better trajectory than falling in with the wrong crowd. It's about ensuring our officers are trained not just to react, but to de-escalate before violence erupts. And it's about holding people accountable, not merely the criminals, but the system that allowed them to believe they could escape consequences in the first place. The crowd erupted into applause. Nia nodded approvingly and Darryl's lips curved into a faint smile. The police chief cleared his throat. Ms. Hayes, I'm not finished, Angela interjected and the chief froze. Shadow emitted a low rumble, not threatening but sufficient to command attention. We require more than promises, Angela declared. We require action. I am advocating for the establishment of a civilian oversight committee, one with genuine authority to monitor police conduct, review complaints and ensure transparency. Murmurs of agreement spread through the room. And we need programs for the youth in this neighborhood. Mentorships, after-school activities, job training. Something that provides them with hope and opportunity instead of leaving them to succumb to the same pitfalls as Trey and Damon. The applause intensified. The chief shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Hayes, these are significant concepts, but they will require time too. Then let's commence now, Angela cut in, because I do not intend to passively await someone else to resolve this. I've witnessed too many promises dissipate into nothing, and I will not allow this to be one of them. Nia stood, her voice clear. As a member of the legal community, I endorse my mother's proposals. I will personally assist in drafting the framework for the Oversight Committee. The room erupted into cheers and for the first time Angela allowed herself to exhale. She glanced at Shadow who sat calmly by her side, his eyes scanning the crowd as if still standing guard. Darryl stepped forward again. We hear you, Ms. Hayes, and I'll ensure the department hears you too. Angela nodded, satisfied for now, but she knew this was just the beginning. The struggle for justice and reform was far from over. As the meeting concluded, Angela found herself encircled by neighbors offering words of support. Reporters sought comments and Shadow patiently posed for photographs, his head held high. But as Angela exited the hall and stepped into the night, she felt the weight of the work that still lay ahead. Shadow remained close, his presence a constant reminder that no matter how arduous the fight, she wasn't alone. And as they passed the park where it had all begun, Angela paused for a brief moment, gazing at the shadows cast by the streetlights. The fear she'd experienced that night still lingered, but so did something else. A spark, a purpose. Come on, Shadow, she said, her voice steady. We've got work to do. Shadow wagged his tail and fell into step beside her. Together they vanished into the quiet streets of Rosewood, ready for whatever lay ahead. Angela Hayes sat in her living room, sunlight streaming through the window as Shadow rested at her feet. The preceding weeks had been a blur of media interviews, community gatherings and countless phone calls. Her body still bore the aches from the confrontation, but her spirit remained unyielding. She had confronted danger directly, and now she was resolute in ensuring no one else in Rosewood had to endure what she had. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Shadow lifted his head, ears perked, but relaxed when Angela opened the door to reveal Daryl Lewis standing there, his uniform crisp but his eyes weary. "Daryl," Angela greeted, stepping aside to let him in. "I was wondering when you'd stop by." Daryl offered a faint smile and nodded at Shadow, who greeted him with a wag of his tail. "Figured it was time we talked in private." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "You've truly stirred things up, Angela. Half the department is discussing you, and not just because of Shadow." Angela crossed her arms. "Good. That indicates they're paying attention." Daryl nodded and settled onto the couch. "They are, but I need to be candid with you. There's resistance. The Oversight Committee proposal. The unions are already preparing to oppose it." Angela was not surprised. She had anticipated pushback, but she was not intimidated. "Let them fight," she declared. "We'll fight harder." Daryl looked at her, and for the first time she detected a deeper conflict within him. He wished to support her, but he also understood the system from the inside. It wasn't designed for easy change. "Angela, you have no idea how much I respect what you're accomplishing," he said, leaning forward. "But I need you to be ready. This isn't just about paperwork and meetings. You're challenging a culture, a mindset that has been ingrained in law enforcement for decades." Angela sat down opposite him. "Daryl, I've confronted tougher battles than this. I spent years in the military patching up soldiers who never thought they'd return home. I've witnessed humanity's worst, and I've emerged stronger each time. This fight, it's one I'm prepared for." Daryl smiled, though it was tinged with sorrow. "Then I'm with you. Whatever you require, I'll be there." Angela extended her hand and Daryl shook it firmly. A week later, Angela stood before a crowd at another town hall, this time not as a survivor but as a leader. Nia stood to her left, holding a stack of legal documents, and Daryl stood to her right, dressed in civilian clothes instead of his uniform. The room buzzed with anticipation. The narrative of Angela and Shadow had resonated far beyond Rosewood. Media outlets had dubbed her the Guardian of Rosewood, and Shadow had become a local sensation, appearing on news segments and social media posts. But Angela wasn't there for celebrity. She was there for transformation. Angela approached the microphone, her voice steady. "We've traversed a significant journey since that night in the park," she began, "and while I am grateful for all the support I've received, this isn't about me. It's about all of us." She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to settle. "Rosewood merits better. Safer streets, a police department we can trust, and opportunities for our youth. That's why tonight we're taking the initial stride toward genuine reform." She gestured toward Nia, who handed her the documents. "This," Angela said, holding up the papers, "is the proposal for the Rosewood Civilian Oversight Committee. This group, composed of community members, will possess the authority to review police actions, address complaints, and ensure transparency. It's not just a promise, it's a blueprint." Applause erupted, but Angela wasn't finished. "And that's not all," she continued. "Thanks to the efforts of Officer Daryl Lewis and others who believe in change, we're also advocating for mandatory de-escalation training, community outreach programs, and new initiatives to keep our children off the streets and out of trouble." The crowd cheered again, but Angela raised her hand to quiet them. "This isn't going to be effortless," she stated. "There will be impediments. There will be individuals who wish to preserve the status quo. But if there's one lesson I've learned, it's that courage doesn't mean you're unafraid. It means you stand up nonetheless." Angela looked down at Shadow, who sat calmly beside her. "And sometimes, courage arrives with 4 legs and a wagging tail." The room erupted in laughter and applause. In the ensuing weeks, the Oversight Committee received official approval from the City Council. Shadow was bestowed a special medal for bravery, presented in a modest ceremony at the police station. Angela stood by his side as the chief pinned the medal to his collar, and Shadow wagged his tail as if he fully comprehended its significance. But the true work had only just commenced. Angela became a constant presence at city meetings, collaborating with Nia and Daryl to advance reforms. Trey and Damon received prison sentences, and Eli, true to his word, testified, aiding in building a more compelling case against them. Angela even found time to meet with Eli privately, offering him an opportunity to join a job training program instead of pursuing the same path that had led him to that fateful night in the park. "You've been granted a second chance," she informed him. "Don't squander it." He promised he wouldn't. One evening, Angela and Shadow walked through the park, along the very path where it all began. But this time the park felt different, safer. Parents played with their children, teenagers shot hoops, and neighbors greeted each other with smiles instead of wary glances. Angela paused at a new plaque near the bench where she had first spotted Trey and his associates. It read, "In honor of Angela Hayes and Shadow for their bravery and commitment to justice. Rosewood stands stronger because of them." Angela traced the engraving with her fingers and smiled. "Looks like you made history, Shadow," she said. Shadow wagged his tail and nudged her hand. Angela gazed out over the park, absorbing the sight of her community uniting. She knew the struggle wasn't over. There would always be more to achieve. But for now, she allowed herself to relish the triumph. "Come on, boy," she said, tugging lightly on his leash. "Let's go home." And as they walked off into the fading sunlight, Shadow trotted beside her, her companion, her guardian, and her reminder that even in the bleakest moments, courage and loyalty could illuminate the way.